Alright, YouTube, it's time to talk about the happy, good thing, by the way, death of the legacy media and the rise of the real press, the true free press, the press of and by and for the people, which is currently taking place. Since the Gilded Age, literally, and in fact before that if you really think about it, what we consider the actual press, after the muckraking era, largely has fallen in along partisan lines because it became corporatized. The politicians realized that the easiest way to take care of journalists that would actually ask them hard questions or investigate a little bit too deeply was to oversee the media becoming a strangulated, almost bureaucratic entity, loosely tied to the government itself, through the two-party system, keeping up the illusion that the Republicans and Democrats, for example, were fundamentally different on a host of issues, and then essentially dumbing down the level of the media. This has especially happened since the television age began. Very shortly thereafter, it goes from being actual journalism, there are actual investigations, they treat all politicians as potentially suspect and simply report on what's happening. They then move towards the infotainment level, and what we see now from the lamestream legacy media, which is dying out, you can see it happening already before your very eyes, and I'm very glad that it is. You see Fox, or MSNBC, or CNN, or any of these, the New York Times, the USA Today, the Atlantic, it doesn't really matter. If it's a newsprint primarily that just happens to have a website that, 10 people visit, or if it's a TV era media group, generally more support than like newsprint era groups. Regardless, you have emails right now from the Clinton campaign that show clearly a level of collusion between the Clinton campaign and the media, the legacy media that is, that goes well beyond the realm of anything I think that any honest individual would think tolerable from our journalists, from our so-called press. It's now being left up to individuals online largely. People who have a YouTube account, they use Periscope or whatever, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever it happens to be, they're an admin on a Facebook page. It's now being left up to those individuals, the video makers, the bloggers, and so forth, to actually ask the hard questions, to disseminate information that may be critical of whatever candidate the mainstream media has deigned to support, largely because of political kickbacks, largely because of the donation of money, the offer of, hey, suppress this story that's critical about the Clinton camp. Maybe we'll grant you a couple of good interviews when she's elected or something like that. I'm sure that money and power has changed hands. That's what's going on right now. It's clear that the legacy media is no longer functioning as a press. Freedom of the press, think about what it means, first and foremost. It is literally a reference to the printing press. It's literally a reference to anyone who happens to want to disseminate information. There was never any doubt in the minds of anybody who was involved with the founding of the United States that the press did not mean the government has determined that you have the appropriate educational credentials to ask questions and you're somehow magically entitled to an extra layer of protection. Freedom of the press involves anybody who is disseminating information in any form. That means you're speaking. It means that you've written a book, you've printed out pamphlets, you've made a video online, you manage a Facebook page. You're disseminating information. You are part of the press. There are millions and millions of people in the United States who, under this ethos, which is the proper constitutional ethos of the First Amendment, are members of the press. There is no such thing as an artificial differentiation between somebody who happens to have press credentials and some blogger somewhere, unlike what Nancy Pelosi has alluded to on several occasions. There is no difference between them. Because the lamestream media is clearly unwilling and incapable of asking the questions that need to be asked, because they have become so partisan that they're not muckraking after both candidates. And by the way, I don't care that the press is muckraking after Trump. They should. But they're unwilling to do it for his opponent, and that's a problem. They should be doing it to all candidates. But instead, when I read the mainstream media on their websites, or I refer to them in any form, whether it's Fox, MSNBC, again, it doesn't really matter what mainstream outlet we're talking about. They are solely fixated in some partisan way on one candidate or the other. And don't think, by the way, that the fringe of the mainstream media, the Breitbarts or Drudges, are fundamentally that different. Drudge or Breitbart are in the minority, yes, and so they look like knights in shining armor by comparison to, let's say, 90% of the mainstream media that's clearly being paid off by Clinton. You've got emails, again, you've got emails where they're openly saying, yeah, we're coordinating with the press on this story, we're coordinating with the press on that one, we're manipulating the press in some way. It's fairly clear in the Podesta emails that were just released that that's what's happening. It's been happening. It happened during the primaries. It's happening in the general. It'll happen regardless of who wins the election. It's fairly clear that that's what's happening. And Breitbart and Drudge and similar groups are doing the opposite. They're still partisan. They simply happen to support the Republican candidate. For instance, do you think for a moment, let me point this out because I don't think people have thought about this, do you think that Breitbart, of all places, would be headhunting after John McCain or Mitt Romney or the Bush family if they had endorsed Donald Trump and were campaigning for him? The answer is no, because they've simply become pro-Trump because he happens to be the Republican candidate for the presidency. They do not care about what he says about issues. They don't care about anything but the R after his name. And this is the big threat if Trump wins, and I still think that he does. O'Keefe, of course, has leaked his first video. It is damaging, not really outside of partisan groups, but it will spread. It'll have legs to some degree, and this is the mildest one he has, so we've got some good hope for good things to come, I would say. It involves voter fraud, fairly clear evidence that it's going on in New York, at least. It is now left up to the underground media. That is the true press, the 99% of people who engage in the activities of the press without being paid a high salary to do so. We are now the ones that have to disseminate all of the information so that people know what's going on about a political candidate who is being sheltered by the mainstream media. In our haste to do so, though, to make up for lost manpower because nobody else appears willing to be up to this challenge, we can't mindlessly begin endorsing the so-called other side, which is really just another corporate political party, just because the candidate representing them happens to be somebody outside of the political spectrum. If Trump is elected, people will investigate him, and they should. WikiLeaks will eventually leak documents from his administration. Snowden might chime in. O'Keefe might chime in. Anybody else under the sun might chime in. If he has implemented a policy that you happen to disagree with, your responsibility is to make it clear that you don't agree with it. Not applaud him as God Emperor because he's never been a politician before. Likewise, if Clinton wins, it's going to be a difficult 4 years because there's going to be a hell of a lot of muckraking to do. Because in that case, the mainstream media won't do anything. They won't do jack shit. They will shelter her against all criticism and proclaim that anybody criticizing her is, they'll probably use the sexist line more than a few dozen times before her term is up if she wins. So right now, the legacy media is declining rather quickly. Trust in the press really shouldn't be conflated with trust in mainstream media, corporate media groups. That's what they are. It's not the press. When we think of the press, you're thinking of anyone who engages in the activities of the press. Corporate media takes money from politicians, donates to politicians through various means. They run super PACs. They appear and they speak on behalf of politicians. The politicians grant them interviews in exchange for little gifts and quips in the so-called media. Money changes hands. All sorts of dirty things happen. It hasn't been this shitty since the Gilded Age, when a handful of actual investigative journalists who today would be those bloggers, would be those YouTubers, would be those Facebook admins and random people online streaming who are capturing evidence of corruption with an iPhone. I bet the muckrakers back then wish they had access to such technology. Those muckrakers that we actually learn about if you've taken anything above college prep U.S. history, those are the underground, the underbelly of the actual press. Because at the time, what happened? The mainstream media of that age, the larger newsprint, was co-opted by politicians, the same people who were carpetbagging personal friends into bureaucratic positions to give them salaries, who were paying themselves more money, who were colluding to rig voting systems in various ways, gerrymandering and so forth. Now, those extremely dishonest people, oddly enough, were tied to the same corporations and banks that Clinton's campaign is tied to today. Because the mainstream media has clearly taken a payoff in exchange for not reporting what's actually going on in the Clinton campaign, and instead to hatchet job and use some yellow journalism, another word from that era, on her opponent, it's now left up to those of us who are capable of disseminating information to tens, hundreds of thousands of people, sometimes millions or tens of millions of people, to make up for the fact that the mainstream media, so-called, the legacy media that's dying out, won't. This may very well be, and I will say this, the last election in which the mainstream media has any real leverage. We're seeing an increasing decentralization of the dissemination of information. Now, part of it uses corporate platforms like Twitter or YouTube. That itself can be dangerous. But generally speaking, those sites derive a huge amount of money from what they're doing, and it's not clear that any political candidate can offer them enough to take one for the team and start mass banning people who are critical, for instance, of Clinton. Hasn't happened to me. Here's something, by the way, I would disagree with on one particular individual who I count among this number, Ramsey Paul. He's currently, apparently, he's now in exile in Hungary and is just planning on staying there for an indefinite period of time. I think that Americans should stay and fight. And I don't mean fight in a physical sense, I mean fight the war of information, because now the time is ripe to do so. The old media is dying off, organically. Nothing specifically, no specific attack upon CNN or Fox is driving them under. They're being driven under by mass public consciousness of their corruption. The time is ripe for people who are politically aware, who are willing to actually speak out, and they're not afraid of dropping a barbell on their throat or shooting themselves 3 times in the back like Vince Foster did. The time is ripe for us to reap the benefits, not only in a monetary sense, of course, more attention, more donations or ad revenue, whatever the hell you're using, more book sales in my case, and attention, but also to do something on behalf of the country, because the so-called press, the mainstream press, is not performing its proper function. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They've become so hyper-partisan on both ends that they completely ignore whatever candidate they happen to back, whoever paid them off, or whoever they support in an ideological or partisan sense. They ignore anything under the sun that they did. CNN would make an excuse for Hillary Clinton no matter what it is she did. And if the leaks continue to get more damaging, it's going to be harder and harder for them to cover for. You may see a breaking point at which the majority of the U.S. population realizes what's going on. And the number of people that do is steadily increasing over time as people abandon the TV era, and certainly newsprint media. Newsprint's been dying for decades. The New York Times considers itself to be relevant. It's not relevant. USA Today considers itself to be relevant. It's not relevant. The Atlantic considers itself relevant. None of these newsprint orders are relevant in today's world outside of their relatively small regional area of operation. I understand. You can get the New York Times here in Vermont. Does anybody really care what they have to say, who they happen to endorse? No. Nobody cares. Because there are 0 people from the era in which newsprint was primarily dominant. There are people from the radio era. Not that that really makes a difference. Radio's dying too, other than, yeah, you listen to your music on the way to work. Really, it's about the TV legacy media, the Carter and Reaganite sort of media, from basically the Dwight Eisenhower JFK era up through the Clinton, Bush, Obama triad era that we're in now. News, insofar as the mainstream media goes, is dying. And so, random people, Stefan Molyneux, Mike Cernovich, James O'Keefe, Drudge certainly has more of an online level presence. albeit a first wave online presence as opposed to primarily social media based. People all around the world, it's to the point where it's decentralized even further than just, by the way, on a national level. Some person in Russia or Singapore or something can weigh in on the US elections. Some person here, like I've spoken about the Philippine drug policy. I've spoken about what happened in Haiti. I've spoken about my thoughts on Russia, on the nuclear stalemate with some of these other nations. I've spoken about the Chinese economy. I've spoken about my feelings on Fukushima and Shinzo Abe's reign over there in Japan. I speak about what happens in Europe. We've gotten to the point at which we have a world media. It's actually a globalized media, but it's a decentralized globalist media. That is, anybody is now empowered to remark upon anything happening in the world instantly and have it instantly disseminated to an indefinite number of people, depending on their ability to speak, often, unfortunately, their physical appearance, if they're appearing, outside of an audio-only like podcast or something. It helps to be female, by the way. If you intend to do this, it helps to be an attractive female. I think we all understand that. Primarily, it's about speaking ability. It's about coherence. That's why Donald Trump probably wouldn't do well if he started, a podcast or something like this. Neither would Clinton, though. She might pass out halfway through it. The legacy media has abandoned us. And this isn't just in the United States. Look at what happens in Europe. Anytime some media order actually criticizes somebody like Angela Merkel, what are they called? Oh, it's fucking Nazi media or something like that, far right. You shouldn't listen to them because they're evil. They're like Hitler or something like that. Is this the point to which our so-called press has degraded? That we're unable to even remark upon a policy position without labeling somebody Adolf Hitler or talking about something that happened almost a century ago? Is that really how far that they've fallen? No wonder they're dying off. Thankfully. Good riddance to them. I hope none of these media groups even exist. By the time I'm dead, I want them to be dead too, essentially. I want them to go the way of the dinosaur. I want people to look up on Wikipedia decades from now. MSNBC, I'm taking a journalism class. We're talking about extinct media organizations. Oh, it says here that they went out of business because people got tired of them propping up partisan political campaigns. Oh, Fox News. People got tired of the fact that the only person with any speaking talent on Fox News got a 7-figure salary and repeatedly sexually assaulted his interns. That's what I want to see on the pages for these various news orders. No, I don't want them to continue to exist. They're worthless. They're not doing their job. They don't even report news. They don't even really talk about current events outside of the lexicon of wringing their hands in a moralist manner on one side or the other, and then spinning it into oblivion about somehow it's some politician's fault who was 1,000 miles away at the time. That's how ridiculous, how retarded our legacy media has truly become. It's worthless. So good riddance to it. Remember, though, if Clinton does win, I still give her only like a 10% chance at this point. Judging from the leaks, it might be lower than that, honestly, as time goes on. If she wins, we're going to have 4 years of pretty hard work cut out for us. Should probably make a video on that topic later. That's about all. Peace out.